One of my favorite concepts in Judaism is that of hidur mitzvah, the beautification of an obligation, of a mitzvah, of a commandment in our tradition. When we fulfill a commandment, we can do it in a basic way with no frills, which is still good, of course, or we can enhance it by doing it in a particularly special way or with a beautiful and special ritual object. Take, for example, how we usher in Shabbat on Friday night. We can use a beautiful set of Shabbat candlesticks to light candles, a lovely Kiddush cup, a challah plate with a gorgeous challah cover, even a hand-washing cup for washing before Hamotzi. Using meaningful ritual objects can add so much to our sacred moments and elevate them further. I'd have to say that for me, the ritual object that is perhaps most important in my life, and one with which I definitely practice what I preach in terms of hidur mitzvah, is the talit. You may not know this, some of you, but not all of you may know this, that I'm a talit aficionado. I own 15 talitot, or maybe it's 16 all told, that I've accumulated in the 35 years since I started with my bar mitzvah talit from Gabriele Weaving, that one has a white base with orange, blue, and yellow stripes. And over the years, I've enjoyed contributing to the Israeli economy in my special way by often purchasing new talitot during my frequent trips to Israel, most of which I've bought from Gabriele. I have talitot for all seasons and occasions. I have some made of silk, I have others of cotton, and even one made of wool, which I must say I don't wear as often because it's a little toasty. I have some with a white base. I have others with an off-white or cream base. I have one with a royal blue base. I even have one with a black and silver base, which comes in particularly handy when I'm officiating at a wedding. And if you haven't noticed by now, I do try to match my talit choice for the day to my outfit whenever possible. It's a nice side benefit of having 15 talitot. For me, having so many beautiful talitot to choose from when davening is a meaningful and special way to practice hidur mitzvah. By the way, the one I'm wearing right now is the most recent addition to my collection, which is as it was marketed to me, is the talit for those who have all the other talitot. It's special woven with a reinforced corner and thicker tzitziot, and so this is like the super deluxe talit, which I bought one of my recent trips to Israel. When I wrap myself in this talit or in any one of my talitot, and all of mine are the fold-over cape kind, like this, right, I truly feel as if I'm wrapping myself in a blanket of God's love and love for our tradition and our people. As an aside, if you're interested in learning more about how talitot are made, taking a virtual tour of Gabriele Weaving's studio and showroom, and potentially buying a new talit for yourself or for a loved one, be sure to join us next Sunday on Zoom. This is June 28th, Sunday morning at 10 a.m., when I'll be hosting a fireside chat interview with Ori Gabriele, and he and his sister Liat will give us a tour of their facilities. Stay tuned for more info to come in our weekly email at the beginning of this week. But it's not a coincidence that just because we have that event coming up next week that I'm bringing up hidur mitzvah, and specifically the mitzvah of wearing a talit, because the original mitzvah of tzitzit, the fringes that are the foundational component of our talit, is actually found in today's Torah portion, Shlach Lecha, and was included in the section I chanted out loud just a couple of minutes ago. You might also have recognized that passage, or the second half of what I read, as the one that the rabbis chose as the third paragraph of the Shema, which we were chanting privately earlier this morning, during which we customarily hold on to the corners of our talitot and hold on to our tzitzit and kiss them whenever we reference them in the passage, as well as at the end of the paragraph and the beginning of the one that follows. As you might imagine, there is a rich collection of teaching and interpretation about this passage and the customs that relate to it, but I'd like to share 3 of those insights with you this morning. In Numbers 15:39, in Bamidbar 15:39, we read, "V'haya lachem letzitzit uritem oto uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai va'asitem otam." That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them. The word oto which translates to it, but a masculine construct in the Hebrew, doesn't at first glance match up with the word tzitzit, fringes, which happens to be a feminine construct in the Hebrew. So from a contextual standpoint, the easiest explanation for this is that the it, the oto, that we're supposed to be seeing, must refer to the combo of the fringe and the thread, as our Eitz Chaim Chumash points out. However, a popular and often cited midrash or rabbinic explanation on this seeming inconsistency between the gender of the word suggests that uritem oto is not referring to seeing the tzitzit or the combo of the tzitzit and the thread, but rather is referring to seeing God's self. Thus, the tzitzit aren't just a visual reminder of the entire body of commandments, the main covenantal link in our relationship with God, but also elevates the stakes even further to be a powerful visual sign and reminder of God and God's intimate connection with us. We don't just see what God demands of us, we see God's presence reflected. Second point, have you ever wondered about the significance of the custom of touching the Torah scroll with the tzitzit of a talit when you come up for an aliyah to the Torah? Dr. Ephraim Spicer was a great 20th century Bible scholar who taught at the University of Pennsylvania. He was an Assyriologist. He was an expert on the laws and customs of the people who lived in the ancient Near East. And Spicer found out that in Mari, Syria, a prophet would send his report to the king and enclose with it a piece of his garment, which served as his identification and as a guarantee that his prophecy was indeed going to come true. Dr. Spicer of blessed memory suggested that our practice of pressing the edge of the talit to the Torah scroll is a remnant of that ancient custom. First, we touch the scroll with our talit, and then we say the aliyah blessings, thus affirming our faith in God, in Torah, and pledging our commitment to it, both in deeds and in words. Signing, as it were, the document while we recite the blessing. Dr. Jacob Milgram of blessed memory, another renowned 20th century Bible scholar from Berkeley and Hebrew University in Jerusalem, offered an additional twist on Spicer's take, noting that in the same way, that someone who was illiterate might have signed an X instead of his or her name, so too in ancient times might someone have signed his name by affixing the hem of their garment to the scroll that he was sending as a way of signing the document. And since in those days only the upper class sent scrolls, the hem or the fringe was a sign of nobility. Thus, any Jew who comes to the Torah and touches the Torah with the corner of the talit and the tzitzit not only affirms his or her faith in the Torah and pledges commitment to it, but also declares his or her nobility as someone of royal status even. Which leads me to the third point about the Hebrew word techelet, the blue or blue-violet color that is referred to in the tzitzit passage that was supposed to be included in the tzitzit. The dye for techelet came from something called the chilazon in Hebrew, now most commonly identified as the murex snail. The dye was incredibly difficult to obtain because each murex snail only produced a tiny, tiny amount of dye, which made the blue extremely expensive. Only the rich in ancient times could afford to have this kind of blue in their garments in general. And yet, back in early biblical and rabbinic days, it was initially assumed that Israelites and then Jews would wear this blue thread on the corner of their garments, which spoke to the premise of the equality, dignity, nobility, and royalty of all Jews. By the time of the Talmud, it had become increasingly hard to find this blue dye since the chilazon had become nearly extinct. So the Talmudic rabbis permitted us to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit with only white threads and no blue. In our day and age, by the way, scholars and scientists have rediscovered what they believe to be the source of the dye, and thus, once again, folks can obtain a techelet cord as part of their tzitzit if they wish, though it's still perfectly acceptable to have only white tzitzit. In reflecting on these three lessons, the tzitzit as a reminder of God's commandments, but also God's presence, using the tzitzit as a symbol of affirming our commitment to Torah and walking in God's ways, and the tzitzit speaking to our innate worth and nobility as individuals and as a people. I think we can also connect this to the moment we find ourselves in as a country right now. As you all know, yesterday was Juneteenth, the commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States, dating back to 1865, when Union soldiers landed in Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. In this last month, since the killing of George Floyd on May 25th, our country has been forced to confront the painful reality that while slavery may have officially been removed from our midst 155 years ago, the cancer of systemic racism still has not. Wearing, seeing, and utilizing our tzitzit is supposed to remind us of the importance of committing to walking in God's ways, of recognizing God's presence in our lives and in the world, and of acknowledging our innate worth. Should it not then also be a reminder to us that we are not only supposed to see God in our world, but also to really see, every human being created in God's divine image and recognize their innate worth as well? Each of us is a direct reflection of God's presence, and by virtue of the unique neshama, the unique soul that God breathed into each person, such that no person, even identical twins, is exactly identical to another, we all bear the stamp of God's uniqueness. It's time for us to really see and really hear and affirm the pain and hurt that our African American brothers and sisters have been feeling and experiencing for too long. Jews may share with African Americans a common history of being oppressed minorities, but I do think it's important that we resist the temptation to make this imperative about us or our story. Because remember that as Jews, and by and large white Jews, we don't have to worry, like our African American friends, about the added risk factor of what might happen if we get pulled over for a routine traffic stop, or if we're bird watching in Central Park and someone decides we're a threat simply because of our skin color. So let's focus on seeing, hearing, and affirming the troubling narrative of racial inequity in our country. And let the tzitzit remind us it's time once again to commit to walking in God's ways. Yes, as a people who should very much understand what's at stake here, because as this passage that we recited this morning reminds us, God also redeemed us from our own experience of slavery. To be part of the dialogue with our African American neighbors and our larger community, and be part of the solution, as daunting and elusive as it may seem right now, to help cure our country of the racial injustice that ails it. Thus, we'll be reminded to observe God's commandments and to be holy, to be kedoshim lelohechem, to be holy to our God. Ken yehi ratzon, may it be God's will. Together we say, Amen.